Hello, everybody. So, one of the questions that I get quite a bit from people coming into the industry, specifically when they're trying to decide if they want to do pen testing or not, they ask, what is it? So, I'm going to take just a few minutes here to give you a very quick run through of what pen testing really is. Now, first of all, understand there's a lot of soft stuff that happens in the beginning where you have to sign a contract, come to an agreement with the customer that you're doing the pen test for on what it's going to look like, what the results are going to look like. That's a whole process. But most of these particular videos in this series, I'm kind of trying to keep it more on the technical side so that you know what you need to get yourself into and prepare for technically. So in this example, I'm going to pretend like Yahoo, for example, is our target. So in a traditional penetration test, we might start off using something like Whois to look up information on Yahoo and see what we can find out as far as contact people, authoritative DNS servers, and other things. And these contact people could be people that we're using to social engineer, or we're using them to social engineer somebody else. So all of this information that's in the Whois records could be useful and could be important at some point. But this is all passive. We consider this to be passive. The next passive thing that we would do, and this is part of the phase called passive reconnaissance, which is like on the front end of when you start doing a pen test. Passive reconnaissance is really important, and it's really where you spend a lot of your time. Another passive thing we might do is try to get information out of a protocol called DNS. So I'm going to use a tool here called DNS Recon, and I'm going to tell it to see what it can tell me about the domain, which is what the -d flag is for yahoo.com. Now, again, if you're entry level, I'm intentionally not trying to go into details about how this tool works or what it's, how it does what it's doing. I'll do all that stuff in a later series. But as you can see here, it's giving me several pieces of information. There's IP addresses, IP address ranges that are going to be of interest to me later in the engagement, right? I'm just kind of getting an idea of IP addresses that I may be able to reach publicly. All right. So taking these, I'm just going to start with the first. Let's start with this 98 range here. And I'm just going to tell DNS Recon again. And this time I'm going to give it a -range flag and say, show me IP addresses that's in the range of that network from .1 all the way through 254. Right? And it's going to give me information about devices there. And as you can see, there's actually real devices that are showing up in that IP range. So what this is showing me is what the names is. Something like Restore Master 1 BKP, I would be interested in that. So I might grep on certain names or look through this data for certain names that would jump out at me as being significant. Like this one right here, for example. Right? Once we have that information, something that we would do then is probably put that to a file. So I might do something like this. Just going to write it out. A name I can remember. And the reason I'm writing it to a file is so I have something, that I can always go look at without having to go back out to the internet and get that. And then we could take that file and we could then take a look at the things that matter. Like, we saw master. That was an important thing. So there's that one. And I just remember the string master. And also the string NE or NE1 was significant. And now I can see the ones that have that string in it, right? So I might now take that string, write it out to a file separately. And that gives me essentially, just that information that I care about. Now, what I might want to do next is take just the last field, which in this case would be field 4, field 1, field 2, field 3, and field 4. All right. So I want to pull out just field 4, which is the IP field. So I can do that by taking that file that we created, which is named that. Right? It's named DNS Yahoo list data. So I can use another Linux utility. It's built in the most Linux distros called awk. and I could say awk and say print field 4 from the file DNS Yahoo list data, and it gives me that. So it just takes out field 4. Write that to a file. All right, and now if I look at that file, I've got just a list of IPs. And then at that point, I might use something like nmap to point to that file and tell it to check to tell me anything that's listing on port 443. So I might be trying to exploit, OpenSSL or something like that at that point, and just saying write the results of that out to a greppable file named Yahoo 443 and see what that actually looks like. So as that goes, as you can see, it went out and scanned. I'm not really interested in the ones that said filtered or the ones that say closed. I'm most interested in the ones that say open. So if we look at the output file, which is named Yahoo 443, and then from that file, if we grep for open, you can see that there's none. So there's nothing listing on 443. So let's go back and do that same scan, and let's check for port 80. See if we get any different results here. All right, so we take that one, we do the same, but this time it's going to be 80, and we can see that it appears that there's none listening or no devices listing on port 80. So this is how we would go through and check ports and find out what services are running and things like that. But eventually, we would go through all the different ranges of IPs that we find associated with Yahoo and do an exercise like this. Eventually, we'll get to a point to where, we find something. Let's, because I'm actually going to go ahead and do the exploitation here. I'm going to stick to, we're going to pretend like this internal network here is Yahoo's, right? So let's say we did find some stuff on one of the Yahoo ranges, and now we're digging into that range. So I'm going to say, show me the devices that are reachable on this particular Yahoo network, and write it out to a file called, Yahoo up or something like that. Now, as we do this, you'll see that these 7 devices, it says 7 hosts, so 7 things came back and responded, right, and said that they're up. So I've got that in a nice list, because if we look at the Yahoo up file that we just created with that, it formats it nicely. And this is again where all of like your basic fundamental Linux stuff comes in, because now you know how to take that and grep out, for example, up and give you a clean version of the data versus just, raw data like you see up here. So this is something that we can now further take. And remember, we just use awk, so we could send that to awk and print out, in this case, field 2 instead of field 4. And now we have a list of IPs that are reachable. So we write that out to a file. We just added the word targets to it. And now if we look at that file, you'll see that it's just a list of those IPs, right? So at that point, you might now say, all right, we know we can reach these. We know that there's something open. Let's go ahead and scan those. So we go ahead and do another scan to those targets. And don't give it any limitations here. I'm just telling it to check the 1,000 most common ports and tell me the services that are open on those 1,000 ports. That's what we're specifically looking at there. Now, once we get this list of ports back, that leads us to finding the services that are on those ports, mapping those services to known vulnerabilities, and then exploiting them. And that's really a big part of what pen testing is when you look at just traditional pen testing. Now we can see that this device has several ports open. This one right here has more open. We can see that this one, for example, has got 80, 88, 110, all these common ports for common services that you expect to see on a network device. But the key there is now we want to know specifically what's running on those ports. And let's just take port 8081 as an example on this 144 device, because I really just want to quickly show you what the technical part of pen testing really looks like from the beginning. A lot of tools, a lot of getting data back, a lot of taking that data and making sense of what it actually means. So now if we focus on the 144 device that we just saw, and we do port 8081, that's the, added an extra number there. It came back as open, but if we wanted to know details about what's actually there, we would do, for example, SV, or that's one thing we could do. And that would actually show us, what the service actually is, because black ice is not what's really there. That's what typically runs there. But if we want to know for sure, we throw that flag in, and then that would tell us specifically what the service is. Now watch quickly. I'm going to go out, look for vulnerabilities for that service. So I'm going to go just out to the internet. We could technically go to a vulnerability database, which we will. I'm just going to go right to the internet, and watch, this is going to happen quick. It's not going to be a long process here to go from here's what the service is to here's a known vulnerability to here's an exploit. It goes very quickly. If one exists, that's easy to find. So I go out and I look specifically for literally what we just saw in the screen there. We saw that HTTP file service. So I'm going to literally just copy and paste that. So I'm going to copy it right out of my Nmap output, put it right into Google here. And say vulnerabilities, just add the word vulnerabilities to the end there. And when I do that, there are several that come back, and they're all referring to this product called Rigetto. And there are some recent ones, there are some 2019 ones, there are some 18 ones, so forth and so on. But, now I know that it's Rigetto. So just armed with that it's got to do with the Rigetto service, I'm going to now search within my exploit database. And this is just vanilla Kali here. Right? I've done a little customization, but not much. Everything I'm showing you here, you can do it just a Kali download. So I searched for Rigetto because that's what we just found out. And it says, yep, I've got several exploits for that. Some are auxiliary modules and some are actually full out exploits. So now I go ahead and load Metasploit or any exploit framework that you want to use that's got, a trove of exploits loaded. And I'm going to match what we just found in our reconnaissance and in our scanning to the exploits that's available in Metasploit. And that's a big missing piece that a lot of people don't understand how it happens. It seems like it's magic, but it's really not. It's actually quite easy to go from here's a service, here's a vulnerability, here's an exploit related to that, let's exploit it. So I'm going to search within Metasploit for Rigetto, and it's going to come back and tell me, yep, here we got something right here. All right, and here it comes. I don't have the database loaded, so it took a minute. It says, yep, I've got this exploit. So I'm going to load that exploit. And then I'm going to set a payload. And again, I'm specifically not trying to go into details about the how-tos or how to do this or what it is. I'm just giving you an overview of what the process generally looks like. And I'm doing this live, so there's like no preset. I don't have like any script or anything. I'm just kind of doing this off the cuff. I believe it was 144. All right, and I'm 137. and the port we're checking is 8081. So now I go ahead and launch exploit to see if it's indeed vulnerable. And the fact that I got Meterpreter session 1 open, generally that means the exploit did load, so it appears that we are vulnerable, that it is vulnerable. So now I'm able to drop down into a command shell, check and see who I am. And I can see that I'm part of the Keytron Hacks administrator domain. So I'm in, I own the box, I can run commands, I can make a user or whatever I want, or potentially, depends on what my permissions are. But then from this point, I would do something like privilege escalation. I'd move horizontally and all these things. And then, once you would do this, remember, we only just checked one port and one service on one device. So imagine there's 20,000 devices or 100,000 devices, each one having 65,535 ports. You got to do this level of check on each one of them. And then you have to write a report at the end on what you found, how you found it, whether you're able to exploit it or not, how you're able to exploit it, and then give recommendations on how to fix it. And put that all into a report, and that's what your pen test report is. So that's a general quick overview of what penetration testing is. And here's the thing. I believe, honestly, and I've done it literally more than a few hundred times, I believe I can take someone from knowing nothing to getting to the point that you can do this fluently, just like I just showed you here, in a little bit of time if you follow a specific path and learn certain things. Because there's some Linux fundamentals, some data manipulation, and some other stuff that's involved in what I just did. Of course, some tools mastery and stuff like that. But I believe anybody can learn it. I don't believe you have to be smart or any of that stuff. I mean, I'm usually the dumbest guy in the room, right? And I mastered this stuff and kind of have become an evangelist for it, and lead other people to it. So if I can do it, I believe anybody can do it. I think any of the rest of you that are listening can do it. So that's an overview of exactly what pen testing is. Now I'm going to do some more to this series, like, how scripting helps you and some other stuff that attaches to what I just showed you. But either way, I hope you enjoyed this. Come back and, watch more. This is more on the technical side for those of you that are just kind of coming in, but you can kind of see what a pen testing, what the process kind of looks like. All right. Thanks for watching.